Talia's Troubles, Part 58. Antonio Mugello's Letter, continued. I know, my lord, you understand how distance reduces the reliability of reports, so I would never presume to suggest that you should wholly trust the information I have gleaned concerning faraway places. I believe, however, that anything of potential importance ought still to be passed on to you, allowing you to compare my words to those reported by your other correspondents. In this manner, by sifting out bias, geographical distortions, contradictions, and the like, you can uncover any similarities and therefore, perhaps, take a step closer to the full truth. So it is that I now turn to more distant events, for which I rely upon less certain sources, such as the second-hand accounts of travellers, soldiers, and merchants, or the reports of those who have heard from distant family, even mere tavern talk. Pavona has effectively endured a blockade, whilst Boldegut's double army circumambulated its environs, but in recent days there has been a renewed flow of traffic. I will begin with the far south, where the soldiers of the VMC are said to have recaptured all that had been taken by the Orc warlord Kernag. People are returning to Pavisano, so that it might once again become a prosperous port. The town of Pugno, which were it not for the Gargese mountains would be considered Pavona's near neighbour, has been cleansed of goblins. Several mountain men, until recently unable to gain passage due to the ogre's presence, have now arrived at the city with their fur-laden mule trains. I learned from them that Pugno was taken only a month or so ago, the last surviving goblins fleeing into the mountains. Thus it is that the VMC now governs a vast swathe of territory, from Pugno and Monte Costello, upon the Bay of Rex in the east, to the town of Mintopua, overlooking the Pyrant's Current in the west, and as close to the Susurio forest as Capelli. Furthermore, their novel admixture of mercantile and military expansion has not been diminished at all by the fight against Kernag's hordes, for little in the way of hard fighting was done, apart from the battle at Terzi. It would perhaps be prudent to presume that their forces have swollen in proportion to the size of their realm. Surely no native Alsentian desired this consequence of their request for aid from the Vereinigte Marienburg Compagnie. What they thought was an offer of generous trade rights in return for military assistance against a particular and specified threat has resulted in domination by a foreign power. The VMC has begun work repairing the mighty fortress of Monte Costello, perhaps revealing not only do they intend to retain control of their newly acquired realm, but they consider it as a stepping stone towards ever greater wealth and power. Are they planning to monopolise all trade with the border princes, to oust all other northern interests from the Black Gulf routes to Araby? Who can measure the limits of their greed and ambition? An interval. On stony ground, Monte Costello, south-eastern Tilea. The double-walled fortress of Monte Costello had seen much better days. The outer wall was breached in several places, including the main gate. Its previous occupants, Big Boss Grutlad and his goblins, had attempted repairs of a kind, although it was debatable whether or not the results constituted any actual improvement in the castle's defensibility. From the sea, many hundreds of braccia below the cliffs upon which the castle was perched, the place looked deserted, apart from a couple of columns of smoke arising from within the inner wall. Taking a landward approach, however, you would see one or two blue-coated handgunners patrolling the walls, while a scattering of labourers clambered over the rubble mounds, operating makeshift cranes to shift the stones hither and thither. At the gate tower, Captain Single's chief assistant, Adelar Gans, was inspecting the progress made by two of the shore party men making a start on the repairs. They had spent several hours already clearing the rubble, but with no particularly discernible effect. Bernd Ritter, a balding Marienburger who had been at sea since before he could grow a beard, and having served the VMC for the last decade, leaned on the stick he was using to pry the rocks out and spoke. "Master Gans, I have to ask, considering the paltry number of men we have here and the enormity of the work needing done, wouldn't we be better finishing what the Greenskins began, rather than starting afresh?" Gans, a tubby sort of fellow wearing the loose breeches, short waistcoat and simple woolen hat favoured by many a northern seaman, looked over his round spectacles at Burnt. "No," he said bluntly. What the goblins built won't do at all, not even as the foundation for something better. Look at it. It is nothing more than rickety, rubble-filled hoardings, half-nailed and half-tied into place. Fire could bring it down in minutes, and artillery could shiver the whole thing to splinters with a single shot. Why, with nothing more than a gully knife, I could cut one of these ropes and make this whole side collapse. I told you, Burnt, said Heine, the other man present. The goblins did nothing good here, apart from leaving, and even then they left a stink behind. I wasn't praising their efforts, complained Burnt, just pointing out the impossibility of we few making any real improvements. Just be glad that you're here shifting rocks and not in there shifting dung, said Gans, gesturing with his thumb towards the inner wall. If I was going to complain, it wouldn't be about that, said Burnt. Gans's face took on a pained expression. He removed his glasses and began wiping them upon his shirt. Go on then, spit it out, he demanded. What would you complain about? I don't see why the General took the greenskins away with him, when they could have been put to work here, shifting this lot, and shovelling their own shit. Ha! cried Haina, cutting Burnt's word short. And if they had stayed, then a small army of goblins, a race renowned for treachery and base cunning, would have only us few to guard them. What could go wrong? Burnt narrowed his eyes, but said nothing. Haina hefted the hammer he'd been using with the chisel to break some of the bigger rock splinters onto his shoulder. It was quite a contrast to his workmate, for where Burnt had a bald pate and stark cheekbones, Haina had hair and jowls enough for the both of them. The General had other ideas for the goblins, added Haina. Let them fight their own kind to retake Pugno. Goblins fighting goblins means less injury to us. I don't think the General needs a commentary upon his tactics from the likes of you, said Gans. He replaced his glasses and, hands on hips, took the measure of the complaining seaman. This is heavy work, granted, but as a sailor you are a labourer. You might be hefting stones instead of winding a windlass or hauling a halyard, but what's the difference to the sweat on your back? Those who marched away, they're labourers too, labourers in arms. Would you prefer to be out there, marching for miles a day, and also you can be blooded at the end of your journey? You get paid either way. But here you have shelter and plenty to eat. If you like fish, interrupted Haina. Gans furrowed his brow and fixed his eyes over his spectacles upon Haina. Which of course we do, laughed Haina, a hint of nervousness in his tone. Like you said, we're sailors. Just get on with it, ordered Gans. I'll come back before nightfall to see how you've done. The two seamen fell silent and recommenced their labours. Gans took his leave, slipping and cursing several times as he scrabbled over the rocks back into the castle's outer ward. As soon as he had gone, Burnt and Haina stopped working. You know, said Burnt, he was a mere grommet when I served as a boatswain on a merry bark. I did know, said Haina. Then, while he mastered the art of gunnery, you set about studying the art of drinking ale. Very funny. Still, I'd rather take orders from Captain Singal. At least he's a proper engineer, a gentleman who has studied his mathematicals. I'd like to see Gans explain the rule of the sun. Haina laughed. The captain's head is full of nonsense. You know where he is right now? He's out there, looking for better stone. Here we are, surrounded by the stuff, with more of the same beneath the earth, and he's off to look for a better kind. And if he finds it, then it will have to be quarried, then carved, then lugged up here. That's work on top of work, and all unnecessary. He thinks himself a maestro, an artist-architect. And you think you know if he is not? Scoffed Burnt. You think you know what is necessary to rebuild a fortress? I've done a fair bit of soldiering, plenty enough to know that a military engineer ought to be satisfied with building effective defences. Fancy flourishes and pretty carvings are not required. Patch up what needs patching, pile up some earth to make it proof against shot, and be done. Once the General gets wind of it, he'll make single see sense. General Valkenburg is a man for efficiency. Why else would the company give him so much power? We turned the watchtower at Terzi into a fortress overnight, and Kernag's army broke against it. Terzi was mere earthworks, said Burnt. It was guns and men on the works that smashed the orcs. I'm not saying it was anything more than earthworks. What I'm saying is that it wasn't shoddy work. It was exactly what was required for the job in hand. No time, effort, or money wasted. The VMC intends to profit from Tilea, as much as they can, and so far they've played a very clever game in laying the groundwork. The city-state bought, towns and fortresses happy to be subjugated, and the rest of Tilea thankful for the defeat of Cernag's Goblin armies defeated with barely a blow dealt. The general has even put the last lot of goblins to work serving the company's purpose. The whole of southern Tilea is likely to fall under the company's control, and the Gulf along with it. Monte Costello does not have to look pretty to play its part in commanding the Bay of Rex, making the profits and dividends that bit more vast. Antonio Mugello's letter continued. From Alcente I will plot a course northward. Although you, my lord, are almost certainly aware of the following news, I include it that you may know all that is reported here in Pavona. Earlier this week an emissary from Lucini arrived, missing the Duke by a matter of days, and today departed in the hope of catching up with his Grace upon the road. The emissary carries an invitation to King Ferronso III's confirmation ceremony. The Lucinian regent, the king's uncle, Duke Ercole Perotto, has apparently fallen ill over the last few months, which most likely explains why the ceremony is being done at the earliest possible opportunity to officially recognise the 15-year-old monarch as ruler in practice as well as name, and so reduce the likelihood of unrest. The ceremony will take place at the close of spring in the Palazzo di Luce, and it is presumed that all the neighbouring rulers are invited. I cannot see how Duke Guidobaldo of Pavona could attend, considering the precarious and dire state of his realm, and it would seem a similar species of madness were the Riemann overlord Matusi to do so, what with the immediate threat presented by Razga Boldegut's double army. I have heard it suggested, cruelly, that Matusi, along with other nobility, might use the invitation as an excuse to escape danger during this time of troubles. After all, he did, so the wagging tongues claim, previously divest himself of his proper authority simply to shirk the responsibility of rule. King Ferronso's sister, Princess Mariangela, 2 years younger than he, and of an age to be betrothed, is likely to become the focus of a second political concern in Lucini. As young Lord Silvano is unmarried, he might well be considered a very eligible candidate. Whether or not the proud Duke Guidobaldo would wish to promote alliance with a faraway and relatively weak state such as Lucini is another matter. However, Lucini is an ancient state, ruled by a king. Should Ferronso die before begetting an heir, that would mean Duke Guidobaldo's daughter-in-law was a queen. Doubtless, my lord, you are probably more informed concerning the following matter than myself, but in a spirit of thoroughness I will proceed. Lord Alessio of Portomaggiore has apparently quelled the unrest infecting Raverno, taking it under his direct military rule. I think it likely that he harbours doubts concerning the VMC's intentions. After all, it was the VMC who sent a force to raise Campanefro to punish Raverno's council for the defenestration of its ambassadors months before. Lord Alessio's own realm enjoys peaceful prosperity, the profits of which have enabled him to send forces of very different kinds to assist in both the war against Cernag's and the vampires to the north. While both these mercenary expeditions failed, smashed and scattered against much greater foes, Portomaggiore has nevertheless extended its dominion, gaining effective control of Raverno, and thus acquiring a dependent march to hinder and absorb any landward attack. If Lord Alessio were similarly to gain lordship of Lucini, Ridrafa, and even, may all the gods shield you, your own Verezzo, he would possess a great and wealthy realm indeed, with his beloved Portomaggiore fully fortified by an outer ring of petty states. Considering he has yet to commit his own forces to any real conflict, it is no wild supposition to assume he commands an army of considerable strength, making him perhaps the most powerful living Talian lord, not including Stranieri, Vampiri, or Bruti. I write this not to conjure unnecessary fears, but rather to reveal what seems possible, even likely, to such an observer as myself. The battle before Urbino was great indeed. Moore's holy army was a mighty force, but the vampire Duchess's army sallied forth unexpectedly, much stronger than the allies had believed, containing monstrous and unnatural beasts and engines, to catch the allies unprepared. Their camp incomplete, their mighty war machine weakened by the work being done on it, and their army made up mostly of mercenary troops with little faith in Moore, all these things combined to bring disaster. The undead wreaked havoc. A mere fraction of the Archlector's army survived to flee the field in disarray, Gedik Mamadou is rumoured to have escaped, along with perhaps half of his Arabians, as did Lord Silvano and the genius Master Angelo. The vampire Duchess must surely have gained great strength from her enemies' corpses, magically luring them from death to undeath and so into her service. It is said she is now establishing a mockery of the Church of Mo, with lesser vampires masquerading as priests and mobs of shambling zombies gurgling foul hymns, revering wicked Nagash. Yet she has halted, going no further south than Urbino. I doubt there are any alive who know what has delayed her, whether it is merely her own inclination or whether she has other obstacles to overcome before advancing further. What few folk have been brave or foolish enough to remain in Viadaza now live in fear of what could come at any moment. Having only recently completed the dreadful work of cleansing the city of corruption, they now face the prospect of Viadaza once more falling under the abominable rule of the unliving. The people of Urbino are perhaps a little less worried, considering Viadaza acts as a buffer against the Duchess's reach, and the soldiers of the Estalian Compagnia del Sole are currently quartered in their city, providing an accidental garrison of considerable strength. Needless to say, Capitano Bruno Mazzolini's soldiers have been warmly welcomed and generously provisioned. As it is commonly joked, quartered mercenaries never go thirsty. One might suppose the Urbimans are happy to suffer the ignominies that invariably accompany the presence of condottieri, in return for the proximity of seasoned soldiers, the prospect of aching bellies, pilfered trinkets, and a gaggle of disgraced damsels fades into insignificance when compared to the horrors of conquest by the living dead. Whether or not the Compagnia already have a new employer is uncertain. They may have returned simply because their Estalian contract ended, but I suspect they have several offers, if not a deal already signed and sealed. Some believe the Archlector Callictus II invited them. If so, Captain Mazzolini must now be wondering what to do, for it cannot be certain that the Riemann overlord Matuzzi, or whoever succeeds to the Archlector's throne, will reaffirm the offer of contract. Other possible employers include Lord Alessio Falcone of Portamaggiore, who, after all, has previously employed large mercenary forces. Perhaps they are to serve Duke Guidobaldo, no doubt eager for revenge against the ogres who so ravaged his realm, as well as to regain what he has lost. Still others believe they are in the employ of whichever Bretonian lord claims to be heir of Rivola, where what little remains habitable is garrisoned by ogres. Or the mountain dwarfs of Carac Borgo, whose rich trade with Tilea has ceased completely. Or even the VMC, perhaps the only employer with the resources to actually pay the no doubt massive sums offered to gain the Compagnia's service. All this, however, is speculation and nothing more. It is reliably reported that there is turmoil in the great city of Remus, for as so often during the election of a new Archlector, factions are clashing over the decision. Even in times of peace there can be much upset, all the more so when the whole of Tilea is threatened with ruin. In theory, Overlord Domenico Matuzzi governs the state with signorial authority, not only able to influence the choice, but also to rule the city with a strong hand whilst the election occurs. But as he voluntarily handed over the reins of power to the Archlector Callictus, he has made himself a weak candidate, even as a de facto ruler, and it is commonly expected that the new Archlector will continue to rule both church and state. Captain General Scaringella leads a Riemann army in the field, presumably attempting to assure the tyrant Boldegut's double army does not trouble the city-state. This limits his own ability either to influence the government of the city, the election of the new Archlector, or establish martial rule. The clergy have yet to decide upon Callictus's successor, a decision made difficult not only by the number of candidates, the foremost being the lectors of Varezzo and Viadaza, your friends Luigi Grassica and Bernardo Ugolini respectively, but also by the radicalisation of the church caused by the growing threat from the north. Powerful cults have formed, the fearful populace swelling the ranks of their dedicants, imbued with Sagranalian tendencies and more than a smattering of the Pavonan heresy of More Supreme. The foremost of these, one Father Caradalio of the Disciplinati di More, has also declared his candidacy for the Archlectorship. Meanwhile, Razga Boldeguts, his ravenous double army hauling a massive train of loot plundered from Trantio, Astiano, and the villages of Pavona, is now heading towards Remus. As things stand, it may well be that all the once great power of Remus can do is scrape together sufficient soldiers to defend their walls, and give thanks to the gods that they can do so. But if they can join with Pavona, then perhaps they can amass strength sufficient to face the brutes in the field. Again and again I have heard it said that the ogres and the vampires must surely be in league, the first growing rich upon all that they can steal, sated on the flesh of their victims, so that the latter can then take possession of the wasted land, raising the dead left in the brute's wake. And so it is. Evil is piled upon evil, as one hell begets another. Your humble servant, Antonio Mugello.